When we talk about photography lenses, and if you want to call a photography lens as good, according to me, there are 4 checkpoints that it needs to clear. These are what I call as the 4 pillars of a good lens. These are optics, build quality, versatility, and affordability. There might be people who might want to add few more variables into this aspect, and they might want to judge a lens based on their own criteria. But according to me, these are the 4 primary elements of evaluation what I would consider to call a lens as good or bad. There might be lenses which are of topmost optical quality and photographers will be ready to pay a premium for them. And at the same end, there might be lenses which are required only for indoor or studio purposes, and things like build quality or weather sealing and such aspect may not be a point of consideration. So there are different ways of looking at these 4 pillars, and we will just use these 4 pillars as an evaluation medium to judge how good or bad is this brand new lens from Tamron, which is the Tamron 35-150 f2.8 to f4 portrait zoom lens. Tamron is one such company which is churning out some very fantastic lenses in the market from the last several months. And I have in fact reviewed a couple of them in the past, and they are very unique lenses, one of them being the 18-400 ultra zoom lens. And the best thing about Tamron lenses is that they come with a very competitive price tag, and that's what makes their lenses very special. One of the newer launches by Tamron is this 35-150 f2.8 to f4 lens. Recently when Tamron reached out to me and asked if I would be interested in trying out this lens, I was initially a bit reluctant, as I would call, or a bit surprised as to who would want to choose such a unique focal length, and 35-150 is not something which we have seen in any of the other companies in the past. So I told yes, I would definitely be interested in trying this out. But what surprised me is when I picked up this lens and I saw the barrel, there were specific markings for focal length, and that actually caught my attention. There were markings like 35, 50, 85, 105, 135 and 150. These are very specific portrait focal lengths. Portrait photographers use prime lenses of these focal lengths for their photo shoot, and even fashion photographers prefer to use these based on the type of shoot that they want, whether they're doing something like an environmental photo shoot or they're doing something like a close-up headshot. Now, back in my office, I was wondering how would I make the best use of this lens, because to be honest with you, I'm not a portrait photographer, nor I'm a fashion photographer. I come from travel and architecture background, and I was wondering where will I actually use this particular lens. Then it struck me, why not use this lens as a travel lens or probably even a street photography lens, and try to find out if it actually suits the whole purpose of travel photography or a one lens street photography type of setup. So what I initially planned was, I thought I'll just take one camera and one lens combination and go out for a particular location and see whether this will fulfill my needs of those extreme focal lengths. And for records, the lens that I had with me was Nikon mount, and I used a Nikon D750 full frame camera for this particular lens. Yes, this is a full frame lens, and this is available in both Nikon and Canon mount, and this can be fitted into both full frame camera and as well as APS-C cameras. If you actually look out for this lens on the web or on the Tamron website, the actual name states that it is Tamron 35-150 f2.8 to f4 DI VC OSD. First of all, one thing to confirm is that it is a DI or a digital integrated design, which means that it is designed keeping full frame and APS-C cameras in mind. As I told you, I just wanted to challenge myself and try to figure out how well I can make use of this particular focal length, and what's the best possible way I can make good images out of this particular lens. But consider the fact that now we are in the second half of the year and it's monsoon here in South India. monsoon and travel doesn't go along well, and that's exactly what happened with me as well. As much as I planned and I wanted to go out, the monsoon and the heavy rains kept me indoor, and I was not able to take this lens out and shoot the way I wanted it to be. So during the breaks that I had when this lens was with me in the office, I just realized, why not I try something here in the city itself. Then I planned out for one kids shoot, and in the back of the mind I was thinking, this is a focal length which would be very handy for people who do wedding photography, kids photography, or somebody who do dedicated pre-wedding shoots and things like that. So I thought, let me use it for a kids photo shoot, an actual practical shoot wherein I go out into the field with a kid who is like super energetic and try to see how the autofocus performs, and most importantly, how is the image quality of this particular lens. The lens Tamron marks it as a fast and compact portrait zoom. As I told you, it has all focal lengths that a portrait photographer would use. I thought, okay, let me try to do some environmental portraits as well as try to do some tight close-up headshots using this particular lens. This was exactly the mindset in which I actually went out later on during the course of this review, wherein I thought like, okay, let me try to sit in one place and try to figure out if I can use the extreme ends of this focal length to get what is known as an environmental portrait, wherein I can show a subject in their environment as well as try to get a close-up portrait of, rather the headshot of that particular subject. On the screen now, you might be able to see some of the samples which I shot both during the kids shoot that I did and also later on when I actually went out and shot a certain travel related content. In this particular example, you could see a fisherman. I actually was sitting on the bunt of the river, and from the place where I was in at 35 mm focal length, I could see that I could get the entire coracle as well as the boatsman on was standing near his boat, and I could get the water and also the hills behind him at 35 mm. But when I zoomed in at 150, I could get a nice close-up shot with a very nice creamy background. Considering the fact that I was actually comparing this lens at the extreme focal length, I didn't want exposure to be a variable which will affect me. So I actually stopped down the lens to f4 in most of the shooting conditions. Okay, let me say one thing. I was actually surprised by the optical quality of this particular lens. Even when shooting f4 for a lens which is a sub $1,000 lens, it was fantastic. You can see the samples here. The images are sharp and there is absolutely no distortion, nor there is any sort of like a chromatic aberration that you generally see in a low-cost lenses. Talking about the macro capabilities of this lens, let's get one thing straight. This is not a macro lens. This is a very typical zoom lens. It has a very decent minimum focusing distance of about 1.5 feet. It's not that great that you can go very close and get what you can call it as like a 1:1 magnification. But when situation demands and you have something like you want to shoot contextual images like what I'm showing you on the screen, then you will definitely not be disappointed with what capabilities it gives. The advantage with this lens is that it comes equipped with the OSD or optimized silent drive, which means that when you are using this for shooting macro or say a close-up of animals like what I was doing, it keeps the lens absolutely silent and also fast. When you just hold the lens in the hand, it might actually look like it is bulky and it's heavy, but it's not. The lens weighs just about like say 800 grams, and when it is clubbed with a full frame DSLR camera, it balances out really well, and hand holding is really very easy. And I didn't find that this is like very attention grabbing or anything, because when you talk about focal lengths like 150 mm, the lens that you're usually referring to are like something like 70-200, which are usually long and bulky and which draws in a lot of attention. But this particular lens was not like that. The best part about this is that it has vibration compensation, and there are certain images that I shot handheld with this particular lens, and this is where the Tamron's VC or vibration compensation really shines. It's all thanks to its proprietary algorithm and the 3-coil system which drives the lens element and compensates for the vibration or shake, helping us get stable shot in all cases. It's always ideal, and I always prefer to shoot using a tripod. But one key thing is that especially when you're using this lens with a tripod, make sure that the vibration compensation is switched off and then you shoot it. It's absolutely no issue if you don't have a tripod, and if you're using it for travel purpose where tripods are not allowed, you can definitely use this lens hand holding and you'll get fantastic results out of it. The autofocus was pretty good and it was pretty silent, and I think I just mentioned in the beginning part of the video that it has something called as OSD, and that makes the autofocus drive very silent, and it's also very good for video as well. As much as I didn't use the autofocus on when I shot a few video clips with it, but I felt that the autofocus was definitely acceptable, and I would rather rate it as good as well. Going back to the lens construction, this lens basically has 3 switches on it: the vibration compensation switch, there's the autofocus switch, and there is also a lock switch. This lens is not an internal focusing lens. That means that when you're zooming in, the front element of the lens protrudes further down. So what basically is the advantage of having this lock switch is that when you're not using the lens in a fully zoomed in position, if you engage the lock switch, this will basically prevent it from creeping, and also it will help you in transporting this lens when it is attached to camera or otherwise easily in your camera bag. The second switch obviously is autofocus manual focus switch. I don't think so, except for the videos that I shot, I use the autofocus and manual focus switch much. The last one is the vibration compensation. As I told you, most of the time I shot handheld, and there were situations wherein I shot slightly late in the evening when it was overcast, and I had kept the VC on, and I was shooting at like 1/15th of a second and 1/25th of a second, and I was able to handhold and get very sharp results. Now we are in that particular section of the review wherein I have to talk my heart out, and I have to let my inner voices speak about the negatives of this particular lens. I usually always say that not all lenses are perfect, and this particular lens is no exception. There are certain quirks or there are certain drawbacks which I personally felt they might not be a major game changer for a lot of other photographers, but for me personally, I would like to probably list down 3 negative points which I personally didn't like. The first one being the zoom range. If you have noticed, is a very unique zoom range which is 35 to 150. Typically a kit lens which comes along with the full frame cameras, they start with around 24mm focal length. So I personally, there were instances wherein I missed out that particular 24mm focal length, especially when I'm shooting landscape or when I'm shooting an architecture. I felt that having that extra small bit of focal length between lower than 35 and it could go all the way up to 24, it could have actually made difference. They always say use your leg to zoom, go forward or go backward. I actually did that, but for situations wherein walking is not an option for you and you're actually using a zoom lens because of that purpose, then the loss of that focal length, especially not having the 24mm, really comes into picture. The second thing about this lens which I sort of thought was a little bit of annoying was, it's a variable aperture. It's a f2.8 to f4 lens. This is not the only lens which is variable aperture, and I really wish if it was a f2.8 lens throughout. If it was a f2.8 lens throughout, I don't think so it would have carried the same price tag as it is now. So that is something which I felt was like, okay, I wish if there was a 150 f2.8 focal length on this particular one, but that's the way it is designed, so I didn't have much options with that. I hope Tamron comes out with a similar focal length somewhere in the future where it's an f2.8 throughout the zoom range. The last and the most annoying thing, I intentionally kept it in the end, is this thing regarding this lens, wherein this lens, as I told you, this is not an internal focus lens, which means that the front element of the lens protrudes forward. That is fine. We know that this is the case with this particular lens, and there are many other lenses. But what annoyed me more was that, especially when you're hand holding this lens and when your front portion of your hand, it's like it's cusping the focus ring. When you actually activate the autofocus, the focus ring rotates. This is something which I found was quite a bit annoying, and this is irrespective of whether you're shooting at the 35mm focal length or when you're shooting in 150mm focal length. You might now be seeing on the screen that how exactly this rotation happens of the focus ring when the autofocus is on. And as I told you, quite a lot of the shoot that I did, especially when I was traveling outside, I was doing hand holding, and I was at times feeling that, okay, why is it the autofocus is not fast? Like, why was it good some time back and why it is not? Then I realized that my fingers were holding up the focus ring, and that was preventing it from turning, and that is the reason why it was slow. It's like, some might say it's like a deal breaker. I might or might not say it's just a matter of getting used to it. If you're somebody who would like to use manual focus on this lens, especially when you're doing video, that's perfectly fine. It gives you a finer control and easier control. And it's just a matter of you getting used to the way you hold this lens. You're just holding your fingers around the zoom barrel and instead of the focus ring. So that's one thing which I wanted to highlight. That's why I just kept this part in the last, telling that the focus ring rotates, especially when you're autofocusing, which at times might be annoying if you're hand holding the lens. So finally, now this is the summary time, and we would want to go back to the beginning of the video wherein we spoke about the four pillars of a good lens, which is the optical quality, the build quality, the versatility, and affordability. Let's take one by one. Optical quality, I think I showed you samples. There's no doubt that this lens produces really fantastic images. They're very sharp, they're very crisp. There is a slight vignetting that is noticeable in this particular lens throughout the focal length, especially when you're shooting at 35mm, and if you're shooting at f2.8, there's a slight vignetting noticeable. But the good news is that Adobe Lightroom already has a lens profile for this, and it just takes a couple of clicks to enable that, and you can remove the vignetting if that's really bothering you. Second thing is the build quality. It's built really well. It is what they call it as weather sealed, and as much as I wanted to, I didn't use this in rain, so I don't think so that would be a big issue if you actually really did that. But the construction of the lens is so good that it can actually take a little bit of sprinkle of water or dust when you're actually traveling and shooting with this lens. I don't think so you'll get any issues with this. In fact, I did get to face a bit of drizzle when I was out there shooting and had water droplets on the front element of the lens, but the fluorine coating came in really handy to keep the lens clean and protected. The lens also comes with a very good petal hood, which helps in cutting down the flares if you're shooting against the sun or something like that. That's one point which I missed telling in the beginning. The third thing is versatility, and there is no doubt the 35 to 150mm focal length is fantastic, versatile, be it for portrait photographers, be it for fashion photographers, for travel guys, or even street photographers. I personally felt that it's a very good focal length, but as I mentioned in the negatives, I at times felt that the 24mm focal length was missing, because if you actually see the competition, be it the Nikon 24 to 120 f4 or probably the Canon 24 to 105 f4, these lenses are a typical kit lenses for the full frame cameras. And if you really don't want to buy an expensive kit lens like the one which I mentioned, and if you want to buy this one to get that extra reach on the top end, you might want to accept the fact that you are missing out on the 24mm focal length at the lower end. But one good news is that Tamron has one more lens, which is the 17 to 35 f2.8 f4, which complements this lens fantastic. I know we are talking about ease of travel, minimum gear, and all the stuff, but it's not that Tamron is leaving you high and dry with like there is no 24mm option. But there is another lens which is 17 to 35, which I mentioned, which complements this particular lens really well when you're going out for, say, architecture or landscape shoots. The last thing is affordability. Yes, it comes with a price tag of about $700 at the time of launch of this particular lens, so which almost accounts to say around 70,000 INR, which is pretty decent and affordable if you compare it with the competition that's already there in the market, and consider the fact that it has a very good optical performance and it has so much of versatility when it comes to the zoom range. I don't think so this price tag would be a deal breaker for you guys. So with all this said and done, why would one not say yes for this particular lens? From my side, it's a double thumbs up. There might be videographer friends who are watching this particular video. They might be asking, you told about videos and stuff like that. Where are samples for that? I'm just signing off this video with a small video clip that I shot during the kids photo shoot for your visual pleasure, which you can see, which is shot completely on the D750 and the Tamron 35-150. Enjoy that. That's it for this video. This is me, Shiv, signing off, and I'll see you again in the next video.